he was going and giving people just advice based upon some, well, let's try this treatment or that. His information came from the research that he did as he studied couples.
Yeah, he and his wife. And I want to say this research has been well over 20 years. So this is long term. This is not like 2 years.
And so if you go on YouTube or Google John Gottman, and you'll see that in a second, you'll be able to look him up. So what we have is a clip, a little video. We're going to try to share. Kandi is the tech person here. So we're going to try to share this video. And we think it we think it really relates to what we're going to be talking about tonight, especially when in terms of relationships. So Kandi, take it away.
Well, from a technical standpoint, at least in my classroom, sometimes it's helpful if you turn your cameras off. I think that may help with bandwidth and also sound quality. So go ahead and turn your cameras off. I'm going to share screen and we'll stay in contact. Let me know if there's any technical issues.
Oh, we can't hear it.
Thank you. 1 second. Let me check my sound and see. Record meeting. Okay, let me try that again.
You're so selfish.
What an idiot.
It's not my fault we're always late.
Forget it.
Criticism, contempt, defensiveness, and stonewalling. Dr. John Gottman calls these negative communication patterns the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse because they'll lead to the end of your relationship. In fact, he can predict this relationship failure with over 90% accuracy if the behavior isn't changed. So, what can you do? Well, at the Gottman Institute, we understand you might not even know you're communicating this way, or you might not know how to control it. But if you practice the following 4 research-based antidotes, there is hope for your future. Criticism attacks the character of the recipient, instead of focusing on a specific behavior. The antidote to criticism is to talk about your feelings using I statements, then express a positive need. Contempt is an expression of superiority that comes out as sarcasm, cynicism, name-calling, eye-rolling, sneering, mockery, and hostile humor. Contempt is the greatest predictor of relationship failure and must be eliminated. The antidote to contempt is to treat one another with respect and build a culture of appreciation within the relationship. Defensiveness is self-protection through righteous indignation or playing the victim. Defensiveness never solves the problem and is really just an underhanded way of blaming your partner. The antidote to defensiveness is to accept responsibility, even if only for part of the conflict. Stonewalling occurs when the listener withdraws from the conversation without resolving anything. It takes time for the negativity created by the first 3 horsemen to result in stonewalling. But when it does, it can become a habit. The antidote to stonewalling is to break for at least 20 minutes. Calm down, then return to the conversation. Spare your relationship from certain destruction. Learn more about eliminating the 4 horsemen by visiting our site.
Okay, I hope you were able to hear that.
Yep. Were y'all able to hear it, see it?
Yes.
Okay, good.
Okay, all right. Dr. Gottman calls it.
Ever wonder why some couples make it and others don't?
Just 1 second.
Scientist Dr. John Gottman did. He
1
spent
second
40
again.
years
Hello.
studying.
Hey, stop. Okay. That was special. Okay.
Okay, all right, here we go. We're back. And we're back. Sorry about the technical difficulties.
Mm-hmm.
So, I guess by show of hands or thumbs up or waving or whatever, can anyone relate to that?
Or identify.
Or identify?
Yeah. Whether you are the recipient of it from someone else or whether you may unconsciously do that. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So for me in all of that, I think my issue is I'm very prone to stonewalling. I just term it as shutting down. Get so far into to a point into the conversation or discussion, or or whatever, and I'm like, you know what? I'm done. I'm out. I'm tapping out. I'm done. I'm over. Just forget about it. I don't want to discuss it anymore, and move on. So that's something I have to be very aware about in knowing myself. I like what they were saying, and this was a real brief video. This is something that you could really look into and get deeper into, but I like what he was saying for each one of those issues. So like with criticism, criticism usually starts with a you statement, like you are so whatever this, or you're that, or you're whatever.
You always.
And you always, that's the worst one, always. He's like, it's always, you're always this and always that. No one's always anything, but the proper antidote for that is to practice I statements. And how being able to explain how I feel or understand my own feelings, trying to examine what my needs are, what my emotions are, and what my desires are. So I can say, okay, this is what I want. This is what I need from you, instead of saying you are something deficient or whatever in this area.
A quick example of that might be like if your spouse, your boyfriend, whoever you're in dealing with, you were expecting a phone call and they didn't call. And you fly off into, you are so irresponsible. Like, how inconsiderate is that? It's different to say that versus when you didn't call, I became worried. I was really concerned. That feels completely different. So instead of attacking, you were using your I statement to express your feelings, which doesn't then malign like somebody else's character or make them feel stupid. And if the other person hopefully is tuned into that, they may be able to read between the lines. Wow, they really care about me. Again, that feels very different.
And one of the things that I added to Kandi, to kind of layer on top of that, I was playing the devil's advocate with her last night. We were discussing this, and I said, well, sometimes when a person does try to come back with, I felt this way, I felt that way, a person can get defensive and feeling like, especially if you come up in a household where you have what we call helicopter parents, or a smothering, hovering parent situation where someone is always checking on you, always, here I am using always, and I said don't use always, but you feel like there's someone you've always,
where you been, Penny?
Yeah,
where you at? Where you going? Where you at?
What's going on? And so having these type of statements can trigger this reaction. So again, and this is a defensive reaction. So here's this other horseman at play. So now I have this defensive reaction, like, why are you checking up on me? What's going on? And so here's another reason why we really have to know ourselves. We really have to be honest with ourselves and figure out what is our own motivations in a lot of, and determine what are our own insecurities.
Yes.
That's the word I'm looking for.
Yes. Yeah.
So the other thing was contempt, showing contempt, criticizing, having a sense of superiority, sarcasm, cynicism. The way to combat that is showing respect, showing appreciation for the person that you're with and what they bring to your life.
I think also probably proper perspective when you understand you're important, but you're not that important. Does that make sense? So it's balancing it out, not making yourself the be all end all, but understanding just like them, God loves you too, but just putting yourself in that proper perspective.
Correct. So the other thing that they talked about in that the other horseman was defensiveness. And that's when someone comes to you or your special significant other comes to you with something about you that may be less, I guess, flattering or again, it's the walking, talking mirror syndrome. And they're explaining to you what's really going on, but we get defensive, or like Kandi was saying earlier in her example earlier, if you're late or you don't call back or whatever, well, if you hadn't have been this, or if you hadn't have done that, then it wouldn't have been my fault. Classic example, Adam and Eve, Adam got defensive. Well, God, it was that woman you gave me, we always want to blame the woman. It's human nature, comes from there, but defensiveness, and that's where a lot of some of that comes from. So one of the things that an antidote that helps kind of overcome that is accepting responsibility. And that takes some humility.
Right.
And that's one of the things we'll be talking about tonight.
That's right.
It takes some humility to be able to accept responsibility for at least a part of, or your part, or our part of whatever happened in that issue. Or in that
Even
situation.
if it's a small part, but it's a part nonetheless.
So the last one, stonewalling, shutting down. And I will say this, it's usually the guys who do this. And I think Dr. Gottman, even in some of his research when he was talking about this, a lot of times it was guys were the ones who will shut down, who will stonewall. Because guys, I know I get to a point where it's like, it's just too much. I don't want to discuss it. I don't want to talk about it anymore.
I can't help it if we have a larger vocabulary.
It's just, I'm done.
Sometimes that happens.
And so, but the antidote is, I like what he says, is to be able to take a break, at least at the longest, a 20-minute break. But you have to come back to the discussion. You have to come back and be able to verbalize what you're feeling or what's going on and what your concerns are. So just something to think about. The four horsemen, as he calls them, the four horsemen of the apocalypse of relationships, and trying to avoid those in our relationships.
Or be aware of them so that you can put in practice things to learn and do better, I guess, in that regard.
And one of the things that in that video we were saying, and Kandi just said, that's a key point, is putting into practice.
Yeah.
A lot of these things that happen, or these four things that happen, are based upon habit, and they become habit, and it easily becomes a habit because it's so insidious,
Yeah.
That we don't realize that it's creeped into our relationships. So we have to practice ways or these anecdotes to help us to overcome these bad habits.
And some of it, frankly speaking, without us even realizing, may be from our own upbringing and how the family dynamic in the household, or your interaction with your parents, your interaction with your siblings, and you're swimming in this water and you don't even know you're wet. So it's just being reflective. And when you learn better, you do better. But it does take practice to what I call uploading new software.
Correct. Yeah.
We got to keep patches.
Yeah.
Keep uploading.
Keep uploading, keep changing,
Right.
As we learn.
Right.
And as we grow, we know better, we do better.
And part of those patches, and making those changes, or uploading new software, have to do with obviously God's word. And tonight we're going to be trying as best we can to squeeze it in, but we're going to talk about patience. We're going to talk about kindness in chapter 3, and then humility. All
right. So Kimberly, what's our time schedule like tonight, real quick? I know it's almost 7:30 now, so what we got?
Yes. So 7:30. So I think about 8:15. We'll work.
Okay.
But 8:15.
All right. That's great.
All right, that's cool. All right, everybody buckle up. Here we go.
Right.
So, 1 Corinthians chapter 13 is where we're pulling this from. And so we're going to look at a couple of things. So I'm going to read it real quick, and then we'll go from there. I think I'll read through verse 6 right now. If I speak in the tongues of men or of angels, but do not have love, I am only a resounding gong or a clanging cymbal. If I have the gift of prophecy and can fathom all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have a faith that can move mountains, but do not have love, I am nothing. If I give all I possess to the poor and give over my body to hardship that I may boast, but do not have love, I gain nothing. Love is patient. Love is kind. It does not envy. It does not boast. It is not proud. It does not dishonor others. It is not self-seeking. It is not easily angered. no record of wrongs. Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. It always protects, it always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres. So first one we're going to look at is patience. Why did he list patience first? The old saying goes, don't pray for patience, because if you pray for patience, God will put you through some things to make you build your patience. So, but I think sometimes we have a truncated view of what patience is. So I guess anybody have an idea of what patience is? Can I get a definition? Type it in.
Unmute your microphone, say something.
And yell it out. Go ahead, Art.
It's going through the trial to persevere, to be able to go through it, to overcome it without complaining or holding fast to that what you know, to be able to grow in that trial and get a message out of it.
Okay, that's good. I like that. Going through, their definition that he has in here, of that he got from the Bible dictionary, is to be patient is to suffer long, to be long suffering. It's kind of like what you're saying, Archie, is to kind of go through, as opposed to hasty anger or punishment. Forbear to endure patiently, as opposed to losing faith. One of the scriptures that comes to mind with this, Ephesians 4:2-3, with all humility and gentleness, with patience, bearing with one another in love, eager to maintain the unity of the Spirit in the bond of peace. So, Kandi, you have something you were getting ready to?
I was thinking about this, about patience.
Okay.
Microaggressions. So sometimes when we think about patience, we think, that patience means we just put up with everything, and we suffer long through all kinds of behaviors and circumstances. So in the book, he talks about we may be tempted to dismiss these kinds of things as minor annoyances, but learning to cultivate patience as we respond to small things will prepare us for bigger challenges. So even when trivial issues can be like termites in a marriage. So what does that mean? It doesn't mean that you nitpick, but some things you have to address. So he talks about how over the years, he had met some couples whose marriages ended because of an accumulation of seemingly minor irritations that left them isolated and angry at each other. So sometimes there are things that you may, in the guise of patience, you tolerate. Okay, patience and tolerance are two different things, if that makes any sense to you.
Mm-hmm.
So in thinking about microaggressions, sometimes some things may need to be brought up, even if they are minor annoyances. And I know for me personally, I try to do that because if I don't speak on it, it inflates and gets bigger in my head. And then Satan gets a hold of it, and then it turns into resentment. So I try to deal with things pretty quickly, even if they seem insignificant, because I'm also of the mindset, I need it to be said. It doesn't mean that when I share it that it'll be solved, but because I've gotten it out of my head, it keeps me from driving over people with my car. So it's hard to be angry at somebody for a situation that really got on your nerves, but you didn't give them the information. So how can a person fix what they don't know is broken? And when you think about it, that's not fair. Okay, so sometimes my point of having those discussions about things that seem insignificant, again, is not to get the person told or even to get in my way, but there's no way they can meet my need if I don't share that it is a need. So just something to think about. Again, those microaggressions, when they're unspoken, they can build up.
Yeah. And sometimes we try to well, it'll be all right. It's no big thing. I've seen relationships or marriages, been around people, especially, husbands that, well, I'm not just going to say husbands. I've heard wives do it too, who will say things to, it's not, you couldn't say it's just totally embarrassing, but it's something that really,
Ow.
just ouch.
It's just ow.
denigrates their spouse in public. It's just a little nick here and there. And then you start, if you're sitting there watching them, you can see them just, and you're back and forth like, because they start nicking each other, you know, just ever so slightly. And you're sitting there like, oh, is that going to hurt? You know?
Right.
And you can tell a relationship can be built on this type of habit.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not really good in the long run, because as you say, a lot of that, I was telling Kandi before class, this is a form of torture. Don't ask me, I heard about it, I can't remember, but there is a form of torture when they'll take a person who, when they're trying to extract information from them, and they'll just take a razor blade and they'll just nick all over their body, just nicks. No major large cuts, it's just nicks all over, all up and down their body. And sometimes we do that in our marriage. We just nick each other, just you know, ever so slightly all over. Before you know it, the person can almost bleed out over a bunch of little nicks.
Mm-hmm.
So we have to be careful with that. We have to be careful. And again, a lot of these things are learned behaviors from our families. And we carry this into our marriages, and we just continue to repeat this cycle.
Mm-hmm.
We talked, one of the things he talks about in the book, the posture of patience. The posture of patience is a proactive, grace-giving posture, learning to give people grace, being proactive with that, learning to seek peace in a marriage. And when Kandi and I first got married, I told her there will be peace in this house.
Yes, he did.
And so we strive for peace in our marriage and in this house. So one of the things that you have to be careful about when we're talking about patience, there are times when, as he says in the book, there are times when patiently enduring an offense is not the most loving thing we can do. We have to be careful that our willingness to endure doesn't wind up enabling another person to persist in a destructive pattern of sin in their own life. We're not loving another person well if we make it easy for them to continue sinning.
So you have to understand something when you're thinking about your future spouse and when you're in that marriage relationship. Not only are you husband and wife, but this is your brother or your sister in Christ.
Mm-hmm.
And when you really understand that, again, it doesn't do them benefit for their soul to allow them to continue in sin or in strong delusion. Now, I want to speak to the ladies about this because unfortunately, because of just, you think about our societal norms, you think about our gender norms and our gender roles, we are literally sometimes trained to do that and expected to do that. Just go home and stick it out. Be quiet. What did you do? Don't make him upset. That's not doing anything but feeding a beast, if that makes any sense. And that is not loving. Enabling the behavior, enabling that to continue is not loving, and it doesn't do them any good when you think about the big picture for their soul.
So let's kind of progress this a little bit. You know, we talked about the whole nicking thing, and we're talking about not just allowing our spouse to continue in sin.
Well, I'm so sorry. I just wanted to, before you do this this section, Erica Littlejohn asked, but how do you not allow someone else's behavior?
How do you not allow someone else? Okay, go ahead.
When you say not allow, okay, see, here's the thing about it. You can't not allow anybody's behavior. All you can do is control you. And see, that's what's tricky. If you get caught up in that, you will find yourself trying to raise your spouse. The only one who can make that heart change is between that relationship with them and God. Now, what you can do is you can set boundaries. What you can do is you could express your need. What you can do is you can, I don't know what that has to be. The bottom line when it comes to setting boundaries is you have to set boundaries and be able to follow through. So don't say something you're not going to follow through with. And usually when you set those boundaries, you make somebody aware with that so that they can then make an informed decision. If I do this, it will result in this ahead of time. You don't just pull stuff out and take control or manipulate the situation. And they didn't even have an idea that that was in place, because then it doesn't allow them to make those decisions. Does that make sense? You can't spend your marriage raising your husband. You can't spend your marriage raising your wife.
Right.
Any heart change is literally from God. So what you can do is you can pray. What you can do is you can guard your heart. What you can do is you can guide your tongue. What you can do is you can lovingly. And the thing about it is, when it comes from a place of love, even the most ignorant person, even though they may be in that sin space, if it's really coming from a place of love, if they're really honest, they understand your motivation.
Mm-hmm.
That's not about you trying to get something from them. Now, may it take time for them to really honestly hear that and have the heart be open. Yes, but that's where, again, you just have to continue that prayer. And sometimes when they're wrestling with that, what you need to do instead of being discouraged is understand God is at work. Mm-hmm. God is troubling the water. But the issue is you have to find that place to gain your strength from God in that long suffering, and then help him or receive his help through the Holy Spirit to get some discernment about what direction you need to go. That's the tricky part. And that's with any relationship, not just a marriage. Mm-hmm. Okay, I thought I saw something in the chat.
Archie,
okay.
Posting about boundaries.
Any boundaries, your soul salvation and relationship with God. Okay, so I want to push you all, help us with this boundaries thing.
Yes.
How we're taught as women, be in subjection to your husband, be in submission to your husband.
Yes.
So how do you be in submission and still have boundaries? Because we know you can't be like, if you do that, you're not getting any tonight. We know we can't do that. So how do you set up boundaries?
Okay, but wait a minute. Okay, but when you said that, even the way your head went, that wasn't about the impression I got, just the way your head wagged, that wasn't about trying to work towards reconciliation. That was about, I'm gonna punish you. I'm gonna get you told. That motivation is not of God. Does that make sense?
And that becomes a form of manipulation.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
So,
absolutely.
So your relationship is then built upon what can I get?
Right.
Absolutely.
Trying to get over on the other person. So now it becomes this game of
right.
back and forth. And that's not what a marriage or a relationship is all about.
And that's not what those boundaries are for.
And one of the things we fail to realize, and I heard a brother say this a long time ago about submission, about submitting.
Yes.
One of the things he said is, to submit to someone doesn't mean that you subject yourself or bring yourself down. Submit means that you're lifting someone else up.
Yes.
And one of the things that we fail to realize, and I have this whole diatribe, if we have time later on in the end, I'll kind of go into it.
Yes.
Kind of a historical perspective about some stuff. But one of the things we fail to read and we fail to look at is Ephesians 5:21, which says, submit to one another. And what Paul was saying, he was talking to the church and he was talking to couples. So I need to submit to Kandi as she submits to me.
That's correct.
So we need to submit to each other.
In the fear of the Lord.
And what that's really saying is, I need to lift Kandi up.
Mm-hmm.
And then she'll lift me up.
Mm-hmm.
And so instead of getting into this game of trying to put another person down so I can step on top of them to be above or subject them to whatever, let's look at building each other up. Scripture says, esteeming one another better than ourselves.
That's
looking
correct.
at each other better than ourselves. So putting other people forward.
Now, again, at the end of the class, and I'm hoping Alvin can share this historical perspective, because a lot of the negative attachment to the word submit has come from us societally and what has been kind of force-fed on us. And again, Alvin has some perspective there, because when you think about it, the ultimate example of submission was Christ.
Mm-hmm.
Christ submitted his will to his Father and went to the cross for us.
So,
and in doing so, what did he do? He glorified God. Mm-hmm. He lifted him up. But we don't see, when we hear that submission word, we get angry.
Yeah,
it's taken out of context.
We've had it preached to us in a whole nother form.
Well, it's been weaponized.
And yeah, it's been weaponized, and it's been used as a power ploy to keep, especially in this realm, as far as gender goes, to keep women down. So, and like
that's
I said,
a whole nother discussion.
A whole nother thing. So one of the things, and I think this will, I like this name.
Yeah, stiff-necked.
So one of the things that he brought out in this book, and we're I'm going to talk about, kind of wrap this up here about patience. He says patience is not the same as passivity.
That's right. It's not.
So, you need to really think about that. Patience is not the same as passivity. So we're talking about being patient with your spouse. We're not talking about being passive. So we're not talking about, so think about having patience, but setting boundaries.
Mm-hmm.
So you have your significant other, your person that you're dating or that you're married to, and they are, like he's saying, caught up in a sin. Mm-hmm. They're caught up in a struggle. That's one thing to be compassionate, to be patient toward them and help them, and if you can, without being codependent. That's a whole nother thing to go into. You can help them, pray for them, but you need to set up boundaries. You really need to set up boundaries to protect yourself in this situation.
And that's not a protection because you're afraid. It's not that about, let me preserve myself. It's not about that.
It's not about that. It's about in a way, you will teach this person what's acceptable and what's not.
How to love you.
And how to love you.
Mm-hmm.
Can you give us an example? Boundary setting?
Okay, so one boundary setting, and I guess this is for both of us.
Okay.
Like even in our dating, we had it very clear. I'm not going to talk about your mama. Mm-hmm. We know that we're going to have conflicts. We know that there's going to be arguments, but there are certain things that we just said we're not going to do. I'm not going to cuss you out. I'm not going to talk about your mama. I'm not going to talk about you like you got a tail. Like, that's not happening.
Right.
And if it happens, then whatever behavior will be put in place, meaning, if this is coming at me, please understand, I will walk away, or there's going to be some type of repercussions in that, because that's just not acceptable. But by the same token, by me setting that boundary, I'm also saying that I will be bound by that. So I will not do that to you. So I can't throw that in your face and then all bets are off when it's me.
Right.
No. So I'm saying by setting that boundary, I'm holding myself accountable to the same behavior. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So, boundaries is one of those things that you really have to look at, because a lot of times boundaries get a negative connotation,
right?
Especially within Christianity and within the church, but I'm gonna tell you, saying no, it can be so liberating.
Yes.
I'm just saying. What was that question? I think I saw something about not enabling.
Yeah, this is a really good question.
Boundary setting with someone else.
Boundary setting with someone else's sin, ? Can you give an example of not enabling someone to sin in marriage?
Okay, so I'm going to give you an example. Maybe, I don't know if this is going to work or not. I was thinking about my sister.
Okay.
Okay, but I don't know if that works.
I can give you an example of enabling and in principle, and maybe you can kind of make it connect and relate. So working in healthcare and in what I work in the hospital. So I've treated patients who are obese. Okay, and I'm talking, I've worked with patients, being in physical therapy. I've worked with patients, 400 or 500 pounds. Okay. They're bedridden, can't move. And so they get to the point where they can't lose weight. And you're thinking, well, and my thinking is, if you get to the point where you're bedridden, why are you still gaining weight? And usually it's because there is some loved one who is there that they have learned that this person, this patient has learned to manipulate, that will keep them supplied with enough snacks and unhealthy foods that will keep them with this weight. What happens is this loved one, because they love them so much, they are enabling this negative habit or this bad habit.
I don't want them to be uncomfortable.
I don't want them to be without it. Or when they call me and they're asking for stuff, and the manipulation, don't you love me? Don't you care about me? I need this. And so you hear that, and I'm sitting there listening to it, I'm like, no, this is not love. That's being enabled. That's being manipulated. So when you set a boundary with someone, in that situation, it's like, you know what? I do love you. I do care about you. However, I'm only going to bring you healthy snacks. I'm only going to bring you stuff that the doctor says it's okay for you to have. And this is where we're going to go. And generally what happens with that, that's a part of setting the boundary of the relationship. That's setting boundaries. And that's not allowing someone to manipulate you. Kind of get what I'm saying? Y'all kind of understand?
It's not an easy thing. I will definitely say that. And there's another thing that if you study more about boundaries are not the same as walls.
Right.
Walls don't allow any adjustment. They don't allow any dialogue. They don't allow any
transfer of information or
right.
knowledge or whatever.
The cool thing about boundaries is boundaries can be adjusted, and boundaries still allow you to receive and to give,
right,
but within certain parameters.
Yes.
So again, it's complicated. Again, at the end of the class, maybe I can share more about boundary setting. I learned boundary setting in regards to my mother and my sister, and yes. I'll tell you about that later, but that's a whole nother conversation.
Yeah.
Okay, so can we get you all back like in the fall to teach the book Boundaries in Marriage?
There's a book called Boundaries.
There's a book called Boundaries in Marriage. Yeah.
Okay.
If y'all like us, y'all can come back.
Oh my goodness.
That'd be fun. That's really fun. Discussing boundaries.
Okay, we're gonna have to put this on. We're gonna have to put this in overdrive to kind of get through some of the content. But again, if you are free, and we understand you may have to leave, if you stay near the end, we can maybe delve into some more of these questions.
Yeah. Well, real quick. Patience. How do we build patience? You know, one of the things we all talk about, don't pray for patience because God put you. The way to cultivate patience, this is from the book, or any of the fruits of the Spirit, is to first learn to think about your life and your circumstances from a different perspective. You need to think about your life and what you are experiencing from God's perspective instead of from your own perspective. This is very true. He said the first step in cultivating patience is to pause, be still, and ask yourselves the question, what might God be up to in this moment?
Right.
And so, you know, that rings so true with me, because I guess being at the age I am, at the point of my spiritual walk right now, I'm really coming to understand this. My father passed away when I was 9 years old. When a 9-year-old kid loses a father, he doesn't understand. Didn't really have family there to really help explain what was going on, what was happening. That's just some family dynamics at work. Get to 29 years old, my mother passes away. In between that, I've lost brothers and in-laws and different people. So understanding pain, understanding death, understanding all of these things in my life. And I'm just now, I guess, getting to a point, I'm just slow that way, but I'm just not getting to a point where I can understand it from this whole idea of patience and what might God be up to in this moment in my life. And so when I'm going through different things or different seasons and situations arise, I'm more quick to ask myself this question. And I understand, you know, what the old folks used to say, you know, when, you know, Lord have mercy, God is in control. God is good all the time. I'm coming to understand that now. You used to hear my mom and grandma and all of them say stuff like that. And so patience is one of those things. That's a development. That's a sign of a sign of spiritual maturity and the growth of patience in your life.
Now, one thing he does say regarding patience, and we're going to move forward to kindness in just a second, but he gives some different things that you can do to, again, practice patience. And again, it is a spiritual discipline. It is a practice. Patience is not our normal programming. It's just not. It's not our default. It's just not. You know, we self-preserve. We want our things our way when we want it right now. That's just it. So patience, you have to kind of go against that programming. But he says, think about this. God has placed you in that situation as an ambassador of grace. as his representative,
Mhm.
as a missionary. You are there to serve him, not to serve your own agenda.
Mhm.
Again, ow.
So let's kind of, put this into this relationship setting here. We're talking about when you're in a relationship and you find you're with someone and they have some sinful or some bad habits or things that affect you. So from a God perspective, God may have you in this situation to be able to be an example for someone else. Now, how you handle this, and it is going to be something that can be a testimony that you can use to help someone else that goes through this. So having proper boundaries, knowing how to set proper boundaries, knowing how to deal with certain things in a certain way. And I want to be upfront here that we kind of overshot it, but I want to go back and say, if you're in an abusive situation,
That's right.
a physically abusive situation, get out.
That's right.
Get out. If it's one of those situations where it's an active abusive situation, call 911, call Popo, get them there quick and get yourself safe as quick as you can, because we're not saying, we've heard in the old school, in the old time, well, whatever it is you're doing, stop doing it and he'll stop hitting. No. We're not going there with that. That's a situation. And if you
Can I give a testimony? I'm so sorry. Do y'all mind testimony? It will be short. Okay.
Okay.
Testimony is of loved ones that the husband was very abusive. He was also a minister and also, loving the Lord and everything. And he told me later that his wife leaving him at Christmas time was the best thing she could have ever done for him.
Woke him up.
Right. And the boundary that she set up after years of abuse was,
yes,
coming back until you get counseling. And he got the counseling he needed to get that stuff out of him. Like it was stuff that was in him. It was that generational
Yes.
That's
slave stuff.
Yes.
But she set up the boundary and said, I'm not coming back unless you get counseling. And it was the game changer.
Right. But see, that was loving. Even though on the outside to some people, it doesn't seem loving. That's exactly what we're talking about.
Yeah, I can imagine the what she went through when she left. This is the minister, the preacher. How you gonna leave your husband, the minister, and what's wrong with you? Being the wife, you're supposed to be submit to your husband.
Right.
All this stuff, but not realizing what's going on. Totally get that. Totally understand. But again, boundaries, walking, teaching patience through your journey. And being that example for others.
And he does say in the book that the Bible does not teach, and I agree, and we know this. If we don't, I'm telling you now, the Bible does not teach that a spouse who is being abused is to remain patient and passive.
No.
If the abuse is physical, a spouse's first objective has to be to seek protection. Pick up the phone, call 911. Let the police do what God intends for police to do to protect and serve. Romans 13:1-4.
Oh, yeah. All right, so we're gonna try to move on. I tell you, I missed some heavy lifting. This is a lot of stuff, so we apologize in advance. So looking at kindness, real quick definition of kindness from the book. He quotes Pastor Tim Keller. Kindness is a sincere desire for the happiness of others. Another quote from Alexander Strock takes the idea further. He says, kindness is a readiness to do good, to help, to relieve burdens, to be useful, to serve, to be tender, and to be sympathetic toward others. It has been said, kindness is love in work clothes. Like I was telling Kandi earlier, kindness puts legs on love.
It's not just words.
It's not just words. It's not just tender, whatever. It's some action that goes on there. Kindness extends grace. So we're just kind of, going through because this gets so good.
I know.
There's something else.
Oh.
Okay. So thinking about a marriage and thinking about kindness and let's think about these four horsemen here that we looked at of the apocalypse. One of the things he says in the book, kindness acts like a marital disinfectant, cleaning away the corrosive buildup that can weaken a marriage. I like that, a marital disinfectant. When you think about cynicism,
yes,
when you think about criticism, contempt, sarcasm, and things like that, and how kindness can come in, kind of clean all that up.
Now, don't get me wrong, sarcasm has its place, because to be honest, if you talk to my children and my husband, sarcasm is my love language, but it's out of humor. That's different. I'm just being honest. That's why I couldn't teach elementary school children. I made them cry. So I went to high school and I teach middle school.
She just honed her skill in high school.
So, I mean, I get it, but sarcasm and that, you know, banter kind of thing, that is one thing, but the sarcasm we're talking about is like the little razor blade cuts we're talking about. That's something totally different and off limits.
No, yeah.
Kindness doesn't come naturally.
Yeah, kindness again is another fruit of the spirit. It's one of those things we have to work on. It's a practice. It's one of those things we have to practice. We have to work toward. Good quote here. Throw it out there. An unkind Christian is an oxymoron. We're not following Jesus when we aren't being kind.
Enough said. Don't even defend that. You just can't. Like it can't.
You know, this speaks to people in church who call themselves Christians. I see people like that all the time. They call themselves a Christian, but they say the most unkind things, and they won't apologize for it.
Right.
They're going to stand on that. They're going to believe that. And it's
I gotta tell you the truth.
Yeah, I'm telling you this in love, but they just cut you all kind of ways and left you just a bleeding, bloody stump.
Right.
And you know, you need to take it. You need to be.
Yeah, you got to pick up your lip
and take it, move on. And I'm sorry, that's just not kind. But again, we're all a work in progress. So how do we respond to that? As being kind Christians, we show them kindness. We show them loving kindness. That's hard to do.
And then I like this last little thing I just saw too. In other words, kindness is not a sentimental feeling that we have. It's a rugged demonstration of our active love for another person. So, we went through that phase.
Yeah. And there's a difference between kindness and telling people what they want to hear. Correct.
To me, that's the difference between kindness versus being nice. I don't want you to be nice to me.
Right.
Be kind to me. Because usually being nice is for show. You don't want people to think, you know, I want them to think I'm whatever. Kindness would be a situation where you may even fall in on, you may even fall on your own, on a sword. You know, you may take a hit or a nick because they may bite at you, but you're trying to be kind and you don't spare yourself because you're looking for their greater good. That's kindness. Don't be nice to me, please. Don't be nice. Yeah.
So we're going to kind of take a look at humbleness. Love is humble. And I keep having to pronounce it with the H, humble. There is a town here close to Houston that's called Humble. Spelled the same way, but the H is silent because it was named after a man. It's a family name. So humble, humility.
So I like that this chapter, one of the things that was said was, again, thinking about how we are hardwired as humans. At our core, our default setting is arrogance. Arrogance is tied to self-centeredness. Again, me, myself, I, what I want, what I need, when, right now. Okay. So what I like in the opening of the book is the author talks about some of his, and going back and reflecting, he started realizing some of the reasons he got married were actually selfish reasons. And I wanted to address it because I think sometimes as we patiently wait for that person that we, you know, want to have fulfill us, or the other half of us, or however we kind of coin that, he says, I was in love with how I felt being with someone who thought I was special. Let that sink in for a minute. I was in love with the idea of spending the rest of my life with someone who would be devoted to reminding me regularly just how special I was. Okay. He also says, there's a little bit of a joke. It says there might have been a kernel of truth to the old joke about the woman who, when she was asked about the secret to her marital success, replied, well, we're both in love with the same person. Right? And then finally, he says, of course, those were clearly not my conscious thoughts. I knew that marriage was more about giving than getting. I knew it would require sacrifice, and I was happy to sacrifice. as long as Mary Ann kept her part of the bargain and kept me at the center of her world. So we have to kind of be careful about that, because we don't realize when we put our spouse or that person or whoever that is that we have in our mind for our future in that place, we've already set them up to fail.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
We're putting them in a place that they can't even feel. They can't even bear the burden of that. Like,
No.
they can't. What does that look like? What does arrogance look like in a marriage? Arrogance looks like this. In marriage, arrogance says, I'm what is most important here. It's your job to make me feel loved, and I'll be the judge of how you're doing. But the kind of love being described in 1 Corinthians 13 says, I'm committed to your good. I'm willing to sacrifice for you because you matter to me. I want you to know how important I think you are. So with real love, self is not ignored. Let's not get that confused. Okay. Again, with real love, self is not ignored, but it does take a back seat to helping your spouse flourish.
Again, esteeming others better than yourselves.
Lifting someone up.
Lifting someone else up. That's that whole submission piece, is to lift others, to lift someone else up. And AJ, yeah, I feel you on that, bro. Yeah, taking several L's for the team. Yeah, gotcha.
Mm-hmm. So I'm talking about putting your spouse in a place, or that person in a place, or even, as a single person, right now, you have those relationships with your parents or with your siblings or all of these different relationships. Again, when you are so busy trying to fill yourself up, you put undue burden on that other person. You're putting them in a place that only God can fill. So in this book, he says, we all like to be encouraged. And that's part of what is necessary in a marriage. That's part, if you're signing on to marriage, understand you're a cheerleader, you're an encourager. It comes with the territory. And if you can't do that, you're not ready.
Right. I'm
gonna tell you that right now. Okay, you're not ready. But it says we all like to be encouraged. But what happens if we have an unhealthy need to be honored or praised? How does that work out in a marriage? Could our arrogance and bragging reflect how we and our own insecurity are attempting to draw attention to ourselves and seek the approval and praise of people, including our spouse, instead of living our lives for God's approval? So for you to discover that, you got to be honest and self-reflective with yourself. Again, when you do that, you unconsciously, or maybe even consciously, you make your spouse responsible for your self-worth. You make them responsible for your value. You make them responsible for your identity. And if you're not careful, you even make them responsible for your happiness. You're not responsible for your spouse's happiness. You're not.
One of the things you got to think about is, or take into consideration with this, is this whole generational effect, the family generational curse, and how it plays out. When we're talking about affirming one another, or being able to build one another up. We have to learn in the family how to deal with affirmation, encouragement, lifting a person up. Humility, that entails me saying something nice to lift someone else up. Humility also entails me being able to accept what someone else is saying about me in a healthy way. There's two or three different ways that could play out. So the healthy way is, someone tells me, hey, I like when you did this, or that was real nice with what you did. Kandi will compliment me on doing certain things. And the healthy response from me, oh, thank you very much. I appreciate that. I'm glad I was able to do something that could help you out, right? A lot of times, though, if we're not careful, and depending on our upbringing, we may not be comfortable with receiving that type of affirmation. And I'll speak to that from my family, from my upbringing. I was not used to receiving positive affirmation. from Kandi. Whenever we first got married, it was a problem. It still can be a problem with me now with receiving affirmation. And it goes deep in the family. You know, even our kids, for some reason, you know, my daughter has a problem with this. And it's called the Imposter Syndrome. I don't know if you ever heard of that. Some of you probably have. So you have this situation where someone compliments you on something that you did, but you're like, who are you talking about? What are you talking about? I just screwed that all up, mess. No, you did a great job with it. Really? No. And so you're thinking that they're talking about somebody else, or you must be referring to somebody else. Can't be me, because we can't take that type of encouragement because we're not used to it. And so here you have this deficiency inside of you where you're not used to receiving this type of affirmation. It's very important because when you have kids or you go on and start building a family, you can carry this type of baggage onto the next generation. And that could be a huge problem for them. And by the same token, you can, if you have a person who takes that affirmation and they run with it. And as we say, we get the big head and they get boastful and braggadocious because they feel like they've done all of this, you know, they're all of this on bag of chips, whatever the case may be.
So with that thought in mind, I think, again, talking about, man, society, this world has done a number on some stuff. Mm-hmm. Because when you look at humility from a biblical perspective, it is not what we tend to think. And he addresses it in the book. I like what he says. He says, I think a lot of people are confused about humility. If arrogance is having an inflated opinion of yourself, then someone might conclude that humility is the opposite, having a low opinion of yourself. Humble people, they assume, are people who dismiss praise and downplay any acclaim, people who don't believe their own press. And I think that's typically what we think of, right? However, he says, but humility isn't some kind of false modesty. Humility isn't about not having a low self-assessment, but a correct self-assessment. That means we understand our gifts and abilities, and we understand where those gifts and abilities come from. So that versus the imposter syndrome that Alvin was talking about. We understand that each one of us has value. Each one of us has worth and dignity as image bearers of God. That's humility. Again, putting ourselves in that right perspective. So it's not all and making excuses. We can stand boldly in the gifts that God has given us, and making ourselves small does not bless anybody else. It doesn't.
So one of the things that I did to kind of help my kids with this, because they were involved in sports and different things. I coached, or still sometimes do coach Little League football. And so this is something that I kind of developed to help my own children to be able to remain level.
Yes.
I call it the 3 questions. And I tell them this is something that you do after every event or every project, or even, you know, if you go to work, when you're at work or whatever it is that you need to do, these 3 questions that you ask yourself to help you kind of remain level. So you don't get the big head, but at the same time, you don't make yourself small. First question is, how did I do? And just very general, how did I do? Did I do good? Did I do bad? Simple. The next question is, what did I do good? And so they had to come up with something that they did good. They had to think about whatever it was, whatever it is that during that process or during that time or situation, come up with something that was good, that was positive. And the next question, it was very crucial and very critical in how I worded it, was, what do I need to work on? And so I made sure they understood is what the way that question is worded. What do I need to work on? Not what did I do bad? Because that's the natural thing. What did I do bad? Because you start translating that into I am bad.
And I suck.
Yeah, and that's not what this is about. It's I've looked at what I did good, and now I'm looking at what I need to work on. And so this helps keep me level, and help them in sports, but also help them just in life, in whatever they're doing, and whatever they are. And then we still, to this day, I'll come up, hey, 3 questions. What is it? And they'll go through it.
Yeah, and our son will be 20 this year, and our daughter will be 23 this year. They still do that.
They still understand.
That was a gift.
Yeah, they still understand. And I do that myself sometimes too, because there are times when I lead worship, and I'm up there, and we'll have a praise team. So I'm up there, and 99.9% of the times, Kandi's on the praise team there with me. And so, I'll go through and I'll lead worship, and I know what I did wrong. Kandi knows what I did wrong. She's there to tell me. But at the end of the day, I have to go through my 3 questions because that's good. I forget.
Yes.
Thank you, AJ. Thank you for validating me, AJ. I appreciate
right.
you. Thank you, sir.
That's right. That is true. So I know our time is getting far spent, so I want to kind of put a bow on this, and then we can move forward past this if you'd like to stay, and we completely understand if you have to leave. So a couple of things that were high points in this last chapter about humility. It's important to understand the difference between encouragement,
Yes,
which is needed and necessary. You're signing on to that if you're going to become a spouse, okay?
Mm-hmm.
But there's a difference between encouragement and flattery.
Mm-hmm.
So flattery is designed to appeal to someone's ego, usually for the purpose of manipulation.
Right.
We're not talking about flattery.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we're not talking about that. We're not talking about looking to our own self-desires or what we need and trying to make stuff work in our favor. That's not what we're talking about. Flattery is completely different from encouragement. Remember, encouraging and building up your spouse is part of our assignment in marriage. So another thing, talking about encouragement, that he says I thought was hysterical, because it's true. He says, you both cheer for each other in the marriage, even when the team is losing. That is so true. Oh my God. Baby, let's be Poole together.
Yes.
All right, great.
So
For real.
It made me laugh because when she talked about this, because it made me think about something in our past. And I don't know if there's a fine line between flattery and this whole affirmation or whatever, but I remember when our kids were young, Kandi would I'm playing with the kids, on the floor, whatever, tossing around, and she would say stuff that's encouraging. She said, "Oh, you know what? You're so sexy when you play with the kids." So I'm flipping them all over the place now because I'm thinking I might be gonna get somebody. So, but it's the encouragement. It's this positive thing, hey. I'm out in the yard and I'm sweating, I'm cutting the grass or whatever. She's like, "Baby, you make that yard look so good when you cut." I'm just going with it now. I'm mowing everything, cutting up everything. But it was her way of, it wasn't flattery and I could tell the difference. It wasn't flattery trying to manipulate me to get me to do this, but it was encouragement. And it was this motivation. And it came from an authentic place, a genuine place. And it really meant it really, it helped me to really have a better view of myself and be able to, like I said, growing up in a house where we didn't really affirm one another or validate one another. And even my siblings who are much, much older than me, we're now at this process point in our lives where we're trying to learn to validate one another and encourage one another. But at that time, that didn't happen. So now it's one of those